here has nothing to do with, being anything other than I need space for all my visual aids. That's why. We'll discuss that later. Okay. All right. Shabbat Shalom. I'm always the kind of person who has all of my papers, and I always need to be out flat in front of me so I can see everything all at once. It's a different way of speaking. So I'm going to start with a story. When I was an undergrad, I took my very first art history course, and it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and I realized it was because I knew almost nothing about Christianity, and that at that point I was just starting to finally wrap my head around Jewish text and tradition because I was raised secular. So here I am, trying my hardest to figure out what is going on in these pictures. I don't know who these people are. This is very frustrating. And then I remember receiving an assignment that was telling us we needed to go look at this selection of images and look at the source text, look at the Bible, look at the Gospels, and write about them, make observations. What does it actually say in the text, and is that what's being depicted? Does it say what color hair this person had? Does it say how tall or how short, or what clothes they wore? What does it actually say? With the idea, of course, being that many of people would realize that the images they had in their head of some of these biblical characters, well, they were an artistic interpretation that has become just the way we think about this. And I will say that I remember going into my professor's office and saying, I'm not trying, because the person before me who had come to see him, he gave me a lot of leeway because the person before me who'd gone to see him was trying to say my parents are atheists and we don't believe in this, and therefore I refused to do the assignment. Welcome to Oberlin. And so I came and said, no, I'm not refusing the assignment, but I don't know where to look. I need some citations. I don't know who these people are, where to even find them. He took a pity on me and just printed out this stuff for me and said, here, just go read this, go away. So I kept thinking about that assignment years later, clearly. And then last year, when I was I'll be honest, maybe kind of a lazy 7th grade teacher, and I was tired, and it was this time of year, and I said, you know what? These kids need some good musical education. We're going to watch the Donny Osmond, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, because it's on Amazon Prime. So, and I decided, just for fun, I was going to sit there, and I was going to follow along with the text. And I was both pleasantly surprised at certain points of, this actually matches up pretty well, interesting. And then we get to the coat. And anyone who follows along in Eitz Chaim, we didn't read this part today, but it says that, Katonet Pasim. If I asked you, what is Joseph's coat? What is this magical thing he has? How would we describe it? Everyone goes, Joseph in a many-colored coat, or the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We have this image in our head of a rainbow, of sparkles. I mean, okay, maybe some of that has to do with Andrew Lloyd Webber. But even so, we all have a very specific image in our head of what Joseph and Joseph's coat looked like. And I was really surprised that first time when I finally realized that in my text that I was reading, which was, the up-to-date JPS translation, whatever else I had set on Sefaria, and it says it's an ornamented tunic, which it also says in the Eitz Chaim that we use here. And I thought to myself, okay, how did we get from that to just a tunic or an ornamented tunic, whatever it is? How did we get to coat of many colors? Those, in my mind, those are two different things. How? And initially I thought to myself, is this just a result of many years of bad translation? Is this just like a centuries-long game of telephone where someone translated of a translation of a translation of a translation? And at one point I went through very quickly just to demonstrate to my students this. I went through and showed them what happens when you take Hebrew and put it in Google Translate, and then you go look at the Septuagint, and you look at the Vulgate, and you look at any text that we have now and figuring out how do we get from point A to point B. So I consulted whenever I have a question, and before I go into a really deep dive, I start with my books. And so the first place I went, I looked at my Steinsaltz Chumash, and I love Rabbi Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz because he did a lot of work to make the Talmud accessible, and he really took care with translations. And so when I remember, I opened it up and I looked, and I saw that he translated this garment as a fine tunic. Okay, fine can mean a lot of different things. Not ornamented, certainly nothing about colors, and I thought that was interesting. And so then I kept going down this rabbit hole. I kept going down, and so sometimes when I really want to get a good sense of where the heck does all this come from, then I also have my copy of the New Oxford Annotated Bible that's supposedly an ecumenical translation. It's pretty good, I will say for that. And so I opened it up, and it said something similar, but not quite. It says he had made him a long robe with sleeves. I was like, okay, we've got an ornamented tunic. We've got this color coat that we all have in our heads. Now we've got a long tunic with sleeves. Where do the sleeves come from now? Where how do we know it's long? And then one of the footnotes had told me, well, it's a traditional rendering. The traditional rendering is a coat of many colors. And the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. Well, clearly it's uncertain because nobody knows what it is. And when it said, initially I thought it had said compared to Greek. Well, I finally realized my abbreviations were incorrect, and that actually means to go look in the Septuagint. And so I had gone to look in the Septuagint, which is not actually what I have right here. That one I was accessing online and had found a really great, transliterated copy with the Greek that was interlinear. And that's when we start to see this assumption of colors. But it still says, it doesn't say coat, it still says that it is some sort of a garment. It's not specifically a coat. And so I thought, my initial hypothesis was, well, I guess that's where we got the colors, and then a tunic, well, a garment that has long sleeves and is long, okay, I guess that must have been in the vernacular, we must have decided that was a coat. That must have just been what everyone assumed a coat was, something that was long and down and everything like that. But even so, I still was obviously not satisfied by this. And so then I also, just to be sure, checked out with my friend the Jewish Study Bible that I really almost never used, but someone told me I had to have it on my shelf. And it says, once again, he made him an ornamented tunic, but then again there's a footnote that says, or a coat of many colors, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Well, that's so helpful. So helpful. And so then I was like, you know what, I mean, we got to, Deb and I both have a love for Robert Alter in particular, so I decided, okay, let's see what Robert Alter has to say about this business. Because if there's anybody I trust to really put thought into translation, let me see what he says. And so, Robert Alter notes that the only clue about the nature of the garment is offered by the one other mention of it in the Bible, which is in the story of the rape of Tamar, which I think is interesting because in this week's Parsha we also, had other episodes of sexual violence, which is in 2 Samuel, which I pulled up, and it does indeed say, the Aleha Ketonet Pasim. She was wearing an ornamented tunic, and also it notes that for maiden princesses, well, we all know that that's really just a very nice way of saying we mean virgins, who were customarily dressed in such garments. So if now we're thinking about this tunic as something that maybe is traditionally feminine, but that was very interesting, and we think about the way that Joseph was special and the way he is described, and that he's this very gentle boy, and I've always now wondered, oh well, maybe are we suggesting that Joseph was in drag? I don't know what's happening now, and so, but then Robert Alter points out that it is because of this, though, as far as he is concerned, that means that it is thus a unisex garment and is a product of ancient high fashion. So we have that, and then there's another scholar, Spicer, who cites as texting the cuneiform with some kind of a cognate phrase that indicates maybe it also means a tunic with applique ornamentation. So I'm like, oh, that's where we get the ornamented bit from. It's because some scholar who was looking at stone, writing said, okay, well here it says this, and it's a cognate. Well, anyone who knows anything about the art of translation, in that there's a phrase in French, faux amis, that you may not actually mean what you think it means just because they sound like exactly the same word. And so for a moment I'm thinking, that seems like kind of lazy scholarship. I'm not entirely sure, not on Alter's fact, but the fact that that scholars at one point made into this assumption that, well, because it says it here, and I guess it's, it's all ancient stuff, that all kind of goes together. And but thinking back to the artistic depictions, apparently there is a 14th century BCE Egyptian fresco showing a captive Canaanite nobleman adorned with tunics made of longitudinal panels sewn together. So when it comes to figuring out a definition or translation, clearly throughout time, we're not looking exactly at the words. We're looking at all these other kinds of clues, which sometimes is very helpful when you're thinking about really the difference between a translation and interpretation, in that certain things cannot always be translated. Now, obviously, this still bothers me. I think, how did we get from this notion of like a fine woolen item of clothing into the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? Like, how did we get there? I still don't know exactly, but more importantly to myself, I think, why does this bother me so much? I don't know. I thought to myself, why does this bother me so much? And maybe it's because as someone who tends to be a literal thinker, I think, well, it doesn't say that, so why are we calling it that? Perhaps it's because I have experienced when I'm trying to say one thing and people take it a different way. Maybe that's the personal way I'm taking it. But then I was reminded that we're a people about words. Words matter. And even as in terms of, we're a culture and we're a tradition that is so focused on how do we say the words correctly, going all the way back to the Masoretes, to make sure that we were continuing to read the Torah correctly and we're interpreting it correctly. All of the vowels and the trope, and this, of course, you could say as a plug for my class in 2025 about having to read Hebrew, and why it is so important that we pay attention to all of the diacritic marks and that. But Judaism is a religion of holy words. We are called the people of the book. Words matter. God created the universe with words, and first act of kindness to the first human being was to teach Adam to use those words. We think about Joseph, who was interpreting dreams. Well, I always ask myself, is he really the one interpreting them? Is it God going through Joseph? Is Joseph just crediting God? We don't really know. But at the same time, obviously his words have power. Earlier in the Parsha, his interpretations cause massive distress to people. He doesn't use his words in a way that's kind, and it gets him in trouble. But then later on, when he interprets dreams for Pharaoh, which we're going to read a lot more about next week, now his ability to interpret dreams gets him out of trouble. And it shows how he's matured. He says, we actually read this part today, in verse 48, Lelohim pit ronim, God can interpret. Tell me your dreams. God interprets them through me. So, why are these things so important? I also remember, throughout all of my research, I noticed that the idea of text and translation is something that we don't really think about here in the synagogue. As far as we are concerned, the Torah is a Torah, which is in Hebrew, and we are all learning it from the original language. I had forgotten until I went out into the greater religious studies world, the magic of the internet, that so many one of the fundamental differences between Jews and Christians is that the interpretation, their entire Bible is based off of an interpretation. There is not they don't learn things in the original source languages. And so being attached to a certain way of saying something. So if I were to tell someone whose Bible reads coat of many colors, well, actually, it's not really that because it says this. That would completely shake their world. And I was reading from a religious scholar who had said that the first time she went to a synagogue and heard a rabbi give a Devar Torah, and she was listening to the fact that he just quoted Torah and provided his own translation on the fly, and how that was such a strange experience. Who gave you the right to interpret God's words? And realizing that everyone else around her, oh yeah, this is how we do it. And so I want to share one more to end with. We have this conversation about these translations, about our texts. In the Talmud it says, Bracha 26b, there's a phrase, Ein sicha ela tefillah, which literally means conversation is a form of prayer. Because in opening ourselves up to different interpretations, different opinions, different stories, we are put into having a holy conversation with each other and with God. Because, we all know that conversation does not in itself resolve conflict, but by engaging with each other, it allows us to see the humanity and really see the world from other people's point of view. I have gone through what feels like a whole journey of seeing the text through other people's point of views. And I will continue to do so. And I'm going to continue to get to the bottom of this because it still is bugging me. And on that, Shabbat Shalom, we will continue with Musaf. Musaf on page 184 with Chatzi Kaddish. That would require me to have dreamt about this, so I have not, but yes. All right, page 184. It's Gadav, it's Gadash.